If you've paid any attention to Marvel Snap discourse anywhere on the internet, you will have heard people complaining about power creep. I'm your favorite 69th ranked snapper, KMBest. Let's dive in to power creep. The first and easiest way to measure power creep is just looking at the amount of numbers on the board. Many of the complaints about power creep tie into this. They feel as though games get less interactive as the numbers on the board get bigger. This makes sense. Marvel Snap is effectively war with 3 locations, and the more you're able to have unapproachably large numbers on those locations, the less things like positioning and planning actually matter. This also ties into the techpocalypse, but there's something else going on here that I think is really important to dive into. And that is that the method by which Marvel Snap has done power creep is duplication creep. You are probably at least a little bit familiar with these guys, Sholau the Undying, Maverick, and Scarlet Spider. I think this is a good example to start of what I'm talking about. Sholau the Undying is an already powerful card, but Maverick and Scarlet Spider take his power and multiply it by 2. This kind of dynamic means that Sholau the Undying is able to use his already incredibly powerful ability across multiple lanes. When you're able to use an ability of that power across multiple lanes, well, Marvel Snap is a game where you only need to win 2 out of 3. So duplication of a very powerful ability means that you're probably winning 2 out of 3. A slightly more opaque but no less realistic scenario is Star-Lord Master of the Sun with Grandmaster and Absorbing Man. This is multiplying Star-Lord's ability to give you energy, allowing to, you guessed it, play a bunch of really big guys so you can win 2 out of 3 lanes. But again, it's taking an ability that is already strong and feeding into it with multiplication of that ability. It's saying, I have this ability that's good, but I also have ways to make that ability happen multiple times that are very easy and not very telegraphed. This is also important. You'll note that nobody is playing Star-Lord with Wong, even though that would work. It's because there are easier and less telegraphed ways of getting your duplicative effects. So where did this start? A lot of people, I think, will blame the techpocalypse for why we're in the metagame that we're in now. But I don't think it's necessarily that. I think it's something else that started happening at the same time. My contention is that in combination with nerfing a bunch of tech cards, they also started releasing a lot of really good ways to copy cards and a lot of really good things to get copied. And all 3 of these factors are why we are in the situation we are in now. I think this stuff was the canary in the coal mine. The idea of make a gigantic human torch, copy the gigantic human torch, have 2 gigantic human torches sitting in your hand or movable, hard for your opponent to interact with, big enough that you're going to beat anything that you are faced with, was the core of move bounce decks for the longest time. Human Torch had to get changed to a 3-cost card before they were even close to being balanced, and even then you were still frigging the Human Torch. That is unbelievably powerful. Frigga and V-Hand has been the core of the V-Hand deck since V-Hand was released in January last year. This is not a new concept, but they have leaned into it so heavily that I can't help but look at it as one of the pillars of the triangle that is creating the metagame that we're in. It's not just that there are more ways to copy, it's that there are better things to copy. We didn't have stuff like this. But also, there are way more ways to copy. What I find so fascinating about this is it's actually the first balance problem that Marvel Snap ever had. The first time they ever did a balance patch, it was to address Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, which were dominating the metagame of early collection levels, with Moon Girl at a 3-3 stat line and Devil Dinosaur at a 3-0. When you had Moon Girl, this meant that you were able to multiply your powerful cards like Devil Dinosaur, or at the time, Nova, which gave +2 to your entire board. The basic game plan was playing things like Nova and Devil Dinosaur and using Moon Girl to have more copies of these effects than your opponent. This is literally a problem that is as old as Marvel Snap, and for about 2 years, it felt like they were very conscious of that. We really didn't have a lot of meaningful ways to get 2 copies of a card for a very long time in this game. There were multipliers, things like Odin and Wong that could stack multiplicatively, or Onslaught, or things of that nature. But by and large, those were archetypes unto themselves, and they were the entire game plan of the deck. It wasn't just the kind of thing that you could slap on as an amplifier. It was the whole deck was about doing this. And I think that more than that, it was also just a lot harder to get to a point where duplicating whatever number you had was a meaningful thing. But I think you could look at a deck like Shuri back in 2023 as an example of the first time this reared its head post-release, as Moon Girl stuff was in the beta. Shuri was a deck that played a card that duplicated the power of the next card. That card was very big, and then you played a Taskmaster that duplicated the power of the card you already duplicated. This basic play pattern is still alive today, it's just much stronger and called Man Spider. And I think that that is a good example of what people are talking about when they talk about power creep. The play pattern is still here, but it's much stronger. That's a very real thing. But it's also, there's a lot better ways to duplicate stuff now. I mean, there's not really much else to say that the graphic isn't showing you right now. Since October 2024, that is to say about 2 years after Marvel Snap released, they have made more copies than they have in the previous 2 years by a pretty big margin. They have really been leaning into the space that allows you to have multiple copies of cards. This is obviously dangerous. Marvel Snap is a game where there are 12 cards in the deck. A lot of what balances out a deck like something like Hela is that it doesn't always do the thing. The more copies you add into the game, the more you're not only intensifying the ability of the deck to do the thing, but the cheaper those copy effects are, you're also intensifying how good it is when it happens. And that's the big thing that I really want to touch on here. Because there are so many ways, not all of them good, but enough of them good, to copy things. And these things are so much cheaper than they used to be. You are able to get multiplicative outcomes and multiplicative levels of power much more easily. Just look at Iron Man Mystique. We used to actually do that. We used to play Iron Man Mystique. We used to play Devil Dinosaur Mystique. Now, what you do is you Iron Man Mystique and there's a Moonstone there, and it's ×4. There is just a clear gap in terms of the way these multiplicative cards work with the other versions of multiplicative cards. Largely, that gap is in the nature of copiers that self-scale. A copier of a card that scales with copies of itself. V-Hand Frigga is a great way to point that out. Invisible Woman, Jocasta. These are copiers or targets of a copy that are able to scale multiplicatively with themselves. Maverick gives the next Maverick additional power. Then you use that Maverick. That kind of stuff is remarkably powerful. Dakin scales with itself. You have, of course, Man Spider, who scales with itself and goes X4 with an Absorbing Man. It goes more than scaling with itself. This is the other thing that has been pushed recently. We did not have most of these cards in the first 2 years of Marvel Snap. They are a recent addition to the game. And I think if you really want my take on when this started, it started with Invisible Woman First Steps. That season is, to me, the dividing line. Many people will look at the Techpocalypse. I think the tech cards were already on their way out, thanks to what Invisible Woman First Steps was already doing. But don't take it from me. I went out and did a little bit of research to find other game designers. I'm not a game designer. To find game designers that aren't YouTube cosplayers talking about this. And I have a couple of quotes that I think are really important to share with you that should contextualize what I'm talking about here. These quotes come from a man named Sam Stoddard, who at the time was working for Wizards of the Coast in a high-level position on Magic. To the best of my knowledge, he's actually currently working at second dinner. I'm unclear on his exact position, but I believe it is something to do with the designing of events, based on a video that he did with Pulse Glazer from Snap Judgments. That said, this is someone who is in the building and is very cognizant of these issues. Sam is referring to Magic here, but I think you can infer the analogy. Because of the rule that you can only run 4 of a card in a deck, simply printing another version of the same card with a different name is clear power creep. If we printed Lightning Bolt with another name, then all of a sudden decks could run 8 copies, and they would gain a tremendous amount, while printing a second Willow Elf would not nearly have as much of an impact. By the same token, certain decks can get huge jumps in power by printing even slightly weaker versions of the same card. Again, look at the Modern or Legacy burn decks, where another sorcery burn spell that does 3 damage could be considered power creep. The only way to actually prevent power creep would be to stop printing new cards altogether. This is largely what I think Marvel Snap is doing. They're not printing extra copies of cards, but because there are so many cards in the game at this point that copy in various spaces, right? If you're a created card synergy card, well, you're going to be used with Frigga. If you're a card that's going to sit on the board like an Invisible Woman's First Steps, you're going to be used with Prodigy. If you're an on reveal, there's Absorbing Man and Grandmaster. If you're an ongoing, there is Moonstone and Mystique. Because all of this stuff already exists, you are able to basically duplicate whatever good effect that you want to duplicate in the game right now. You don't get an extra copy of it, not necessarily, but there are cards that do that, like Esme Kaku, but you are getting the multiplicative effect of it. And this is especially deleterious to the game state of a game like Marvel Snap, which is effectively just war. If you have a really big game-winning effect and it's going to win a lane, that's fine, because that's only one lane. You're allowed to print cards that win one lane. The problem is when you have a really big game-winning effect that you duplicate, and then it wins 2 lanes, and then neither player feels like there was anything involved in the game at all. 2 ships passing in the night taken to the nth degree. You have an 108 power Man Spider and an 108 power Taskmaster. I don't have anything I can do about that. Sam also talked in the same article about handling power creep. If power creep to some extent is inevitable within Magic as a whole, the question is not how to stop it totally, but how to best manage to keep the game going strong ad infinitum. By far the most important thing that was done in the early years was the creation of the standard format. The standard format, for those who are unaware, is a format where rotation occurs. Cards leave the format in order to keep the power level artificially low. Before that, tournaments had no legality date, and within the first year of the game, Library of Alexandria, Mishra's Workshop, Strip Mine, Moat, The Abyss, and Mana Drain had all been printed. You can take my word on it that all of these cards are heinously, hysterically broken. Any further attempt to keep up with the Joneses in regards to those cards would have led us to a game totally unlike what we have today, if it even still existed. Trying to constantly push cards in different directions only works if you are printing cards of similar power levels to cards you printed the year before. It doesn't matter how interesting the newest card in this set is if it just can't compete with Turn 1 Library of Alexandria, or if it has to work with Black Lotus. Something had to be done for the overall health of the game. I'm not saying this applies directly to Marvel Snap, but it does echo a lot of community sentiment I see. People react to new cards coming out with either this card is busted and amazing or totally unplayable. Cards that are meant to push the metagame in new directions simply lie unused because they don't synergize well enough with things that are already demonstrably strong. And because of the way in which Marvel Snap has created cards that copy other cards' effects, I don't know if there's room for them to ever make a card that isn't worried about getting copied. For example, the data mined objective cards. Well, here's the thing that's probably going to work with those is you can prodigy them even after they've already completed their objective and then get a second copy of the objective. That's probably the #1 design concern of how that works. For the record, I'm pretty sure that works because that's how Prodigy works with an already used up activate. So why wouldn't it work that way? The problem I'm pointing out here is every single card they have to make now has to run a gamut of what happens if you copy it? 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 And there's like 75 different efficient ways to copy different versions of effects. We have hit copy saturation. So what the hell are you supposed to do about it? I mean, look, I cosplay a game designer here, but ultimately I'm just a YouTuber who has the skill set of being pretty good at a card game and being pretty okay at talking about it. I am not actually a game designer. But I do hope that this video was able to help you understand the landscape of Marvel Snap and why things are the way they are. I think a lot of people feel things intuitively, but aren't able to express them in words that are actually meaningfully making sense. They just say things that sound right and feel right, but haven't actually delved into the why. And I'm hoping that this video equips you, the viewer, with a better insight into why you might be feeling this way. As always, I have been KMBest, you have been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content. And just on a personal note, this was a very difficult video to make. I worry that I didn't loop it all together perfectly. It's hard to talk about this stuff because it's so nebulous, but I do think that I am touching on a real thing here. And I realize that by the nature of the internet, what's going to happen is someone's going to be like, you forgot, you know, Misery or Wong or Odin or whatever on the copiers. And I think that's like a valid thing, but there's a bunch of nuance going on there. And I hope it didn't detract from the entire point. I hope there's nobody who was like 8 minutes into the video and was like, I am so angry that you didn't put Wong on here for various reasons, or Silver Surfer First Steps or whatever. I thought about all of these cards. It just didn't add to the video to explain why I didn't think they qualified. But if you want to talk about it, as always, I'm available in my Discord. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.